Now I'm going to say this again, right? But I know how much trauma I've been through. I mean, no denial about that. But perhaps I've just normalised it in some way because this is my life. So it just took somebody to put it in a different way that made me suddenly see the enormity of what I've been through and how that might then be impacting my life still today. Hey folks, it's Finn. Welcome back, lovely people. It's lovely to see you as always. So today's video is a continuation on my thoughts and waffles around this chronic fatigue that I have. I'm being told by you lovely people that you do still enjoy my waffles, or has somebody really lovingly called it a faffle. Because Finn, waffle, faffle, fiffle. Fiffle? At the moment I am learning so much about chronic fatigue and what causes it. And I'm learning that this is very, very multifaceted. There's lots of complex layers that go into causing chronic fatigue. You've got the body and its inability to make energy. You've got things like stress and overworking. And you've also got things like trauma. That's either physical trauma, going through ill health, or mental trauma, where something in your life happens, something hugely significant, like losing someone. And this also can contribute to a chronic fatigue situation happening in your body. Bodies and minds are complicated things. In my last video, I spoke about how I'd really realised how much work I've done in the last 11 years and how much that overworking has likely had some impact on this current chronic fatigue that I'm experiencing. I have been working so hard over these last 11 years in terms of getting clean and sober, in terms of my gender transition, and in terms of rebuilding my entire life and career. I am not a man who does anything by half. In today's video, as promised, I want to talk about the trauma side of things, as well as all of this overwork in the last 11 years. I'm now having some realizations about how all of the trauma that I've been through is affecting me, and how I really hadn't really taken into consideration the impact of all of that in the way that I am now. I also, again, want to mention a book that I'm finding really helpful, and that is Decode Your Fatigue by Alex Howard. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but this book has really been helping me, and I'll put a link to Alex Howard and his book in the comments below. Before we crack on, as always, I just want to say a massive thank you to all the new folks who have been finding my channel over the last few weeks and leaving such lovely comments. I'm so grateful for you all. If you are new and you're just having a look at all my content, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. It really does help. Helps me, and of course it helps you as well, because once you subscribe, tick notifications, you'll be notified whenever I upload anything new. Right, let's get into trauma. It's not something you usually say. No, I am in no denial whatsoever about the amount of trauma I have been through in my life. I know I have. Right from a young age, it's been incredibly traumatic. I had a really difficult childhood growing up. There was lots of parental problems, divorce, access issues. It was pretty hellish. I also, of course, had undiagnosed gender dysphoria growing up, and that in turn caused a ton of really severe mental health challenges that still affect me today, especially depression and anxiety. I lost my dad at a very young age. I was only 13 when he died. Because of the depression and anxiety and the inability to get an answer as to why I felt like I did, I unfortunately turned to unhealthy ways to cope, such as drinking, taking drugs, self-harming, having very much disordered eating in order to cope with my body issues. All of that, of course, has been going on from the age of 13 till 37, when I was in huge active addiction, really living a very chaotic lifestyle, so much trauma involved in that. Then of course I got clean and sober, and although getting clean and sober was positive things are still traumatic, because the act of getting clean and sober, my body adapting to sobriety, detoxing, learning to live a different way, that's hugely traumatic. I completely revamped how I looked at my life, how I dealt with the world, how I dealt with myself, how I dealt with mental health. That's traumatic. Then I came out as trans. That's traumatic, you know, just living as a trans person and dealing with coming out, rejection, the stigma in society, the hoops you have to jump through, the huge waiting list for any treatment. And then, of course, going through treatment is incredibly stressful, traumatic. Even the good stuff, it's traumatic. Going through a second puberty at 37, pretty traumatic. And of course, the surgery, especially my lower surgery, that was intense. 3 years, 6 surgeries, a lot of which went wrong on the way, a lot of complications, as is normal with surgery, don't forget. But of course, even though this is surgery I wanted and all of that problem was resolved, it's still a lot of trauma. And of course, I lost my lovely mum a couple of years ago. First to the dementia that took her really quickly, and then when she actually physically left us. And that is hugely traumatic. And we've just moved to Devon. Again, a positive thing, but a move is still traumatic. When you lay it all out there like that in a list, no surprising really that it's had an effect. So why is learning about trauma taking me by surprise? Well, because I'm not in any denial of my trauma. I was when I was drinking, because for me drinking was a way of blocking all of that out. And then when I got clean and sober, I then acknowledged everything that I'd gone through and began to do lots of really deep work, deep, honest work on myself in terms of therapy, counselling, self-help, everything, to overcome all of that past and to stop it affecting me. Of course, it still will. It still will for many years. But in terms of dealing with it, addressing it, learning to view it very differently, using a bit of alchemy on it to turn it into something positive, I've done a ton of work. But because my focus on dealing with it has been very mental, psychology based, I hadn't really stopped to consider that all of that might still be having an effect on me physically and perhaps also subconsciously. And I reckon it really is. What's woken me up to this new realisation is being directed towards this wonderful chap, Alex Howard. Now, once again, it was one of you wonderful FinFam members who sent me a link to a challenge Alex was doing called the 21-Day Decode Your Fatigue Challenge, where he was sharing a video each day on different aspects of fatigue, why it happens, how to manage it and so forth. This was all done in the lead up to his book of the same name, Decode Your Fatigue. So every day on Facebook he was doing a video on each chapter, and oh my goodness, these really opened my eyes. They were perfectly timed again, just like the book I spoke about last week, Devon Price, Laziness Doesn't Exist. It was just so well timed. I love this, how the universe does seem to send me the people who then send me the places I need to go to hear the right stuff that I needed to hear just at that time. I do love a good God incidence. I cannot remember the name of the person who sent me in the direction of Alex Howard, so thank you very much. If you're watching this, I'm incredibly grateful. Do comment and let me know it was you, and I can give you a virtual hug. Listening to Howard in his videos is just like, I'm just nodding along with it all the time. It makes so much sense, and it's really helping me to understand how fatigue happens, what happens in our body, why I'm feeling like I am, and the significance of trauma and its part in fatigue. Alex is particularly skilled at really clearly explaining, without an overly technical way of using language, how our nervous system deals with stress and what happens. And Alex explains how, as human beings, we're not designed to deal with chronic stress. We're very set up to deal with immediate stress. We have a really effective fight and flight system where when a threat happens, we quickly come to action, do something, fight or flee, and then once we're in a safe place, our nervous system calms again. And that we can deal with. But when as humans we're in this constant state of stress all the time, our body cannot deal with that over a large period of time. And so when we're constantly in these stressing states, eventually our stress response becomes what Alex calls maladaptive. This makes so much sense to me. I have been so hugely stressed, especially over the last 11 years. Not always in a bad way, don't get me wrong. You know, the things like I had to do, like manage life in sobriety, return to university, you know, all of these kind of things, these really stressing things in life, not all of which are bad, meaning that this state of chronic fatigue that I'm in has likely been caused, in part, like with all the other things that impact it, by my being in chronic stress for so long and ended up in this maladaptive stress response. Well, that's a bit of a realisation. Has it helped, Finn? Absolutely yes. As odd as it is to have these big realisations and go, how did I not notice this? It's also, and more so, helpful. Because when you can't make sense of what's going on, you get so frustrated. I've been so frustrated at trying to deal with this fatigue, especially how it's been since we moved in June. I mean, I've had bad periods of this fatigue, but this time, I mean, it's just constant, doesn't go. And it's been terrifying at times. Frustrating, terrifying, all of these things. So to understand what's going on in my body is so incredibly helpful to make sense of this, to accept it, and to know what to do. What it really does help with is permission, because like I explained with the other video where I've been doing so much and I hadn't realised how much, once you realise the enormity of something, it's then easier to go, oh okay, yeah, I can stop. My poor body has worked so hard. It deserves a break. And that's exactly it. Seeing a different side of it, being able to acknowledge and congratulate myself for dealing with all of this so well in terms of mentally. It's now time to deal with it physically. And so it's much able to say, okay, this is my time now to take that physical break, time off, time for my body to just rest and do whatever it wants to do. And looking at what I've been through, that's okay. And this is also making me have some pretty giant realizations about the way I live my life, about some of my core beliefs. Ooh, do tell. What I mean by this, more than anything, is in terms of how I manage and deal with my mental health, especially my anxiety. My whole philosophy on life in the last 11 years since I got clean and sober has been about getting the most out of life I can, challenging all of my fears, getting outside my comfort zone. That is what's driven me every single time. I live by that song in Sunscreen, do something that scares you every day. That really has been my philosophy. Doesn't matter how much it terrifies you, get out there and do it. I'd hidden my entire life up until the age of 37, numbing everything, hiding from the world, because I was terrified of everything and everyone. And in getting clean and sober, in transitioning, I wanted to just stop being afraid. Whatever I wanted to do, get out there and do it, no matter how much it scared the bejesus out of me. Now, I'm not saying that that philosophy and way of living is wrong or was wrong. It was what I needed at the time. Had I not had that get out of my comfort zone approach, I'd never have got clean and sober. I never would have had the guts to come out and begin my transition. I never would have managed to go to university. All of the things I've done because I've learned to feel the fear and do it anyway. But I can now also see how this huge anxiety of mine and me refusing to let it stop me and pushing through it may also have contributed to me going into a maladaptive stress response and now being chronically fatigued and unwell. And this is one of those realizations in terms of my current diagnosis, which is generalized anxiety disorder. This is one of those realizations that's now changing everything in terms of the advice I would now give to others in terms of how they manage their anxiety. especially when it's something like generalised anxiety disorder. Now, this is something that would probably take a lot of time to talk about because it's one of my Finn waffles. So at some point, I'm actually going to do a video about it because it really is changing my views and opinions and ideas about how to manage chronic anxiety. So what are you going to do with this new knowledge, Finn? Well, I think I need more therapy. Joking aside, although I'm actually not joking, I do need some more therapy. It's about doing things differently now going forward. I did need to push myself in the way I did. As I said, if I hadn't, I wouldn't be where I am now. But that's done now. There is no need to push myself anymore. I don't need to keep pushing my comfort zone and always going one step further and pushing it more and being more scared and doing all the scary stuff. Now is the time to actually come back from my comfort zone edge and make my comfort zone quite tiny. I never thought I'd be saying that. Going forward, if my anxiety doesn't want to do something, I'm not going to do it. From now on, I will be known as the anxiety rebel. I'm making light of this because that's how I cope. I always make light of things. But in all seriousness, this is much easier said than done because, and I even spoke about this recently in terms of COVID, my fear when the pandemic happened and we were having to isolate was that if I got out of the habit of challenging my anxiety, it would take over again and keep me stuck indoors. And I still have that fear now. You know, I am concerned that what if I start to give into anxiety in order to protect my stress levels, but in doing so, it makes my generalised anxiety disorder that much worse. I think it's about balance, isn't it? I mean, if I end up just not going out for like months on end, then I've got a problem. But it's about doing this in a much more mindful way, rethinking now that this isn't the time to be really pushing boundaries and comfort zones. This is the time to be coming into a healing state in my body, coming out of that maladaptive stress response and healing as much as possible. And this really goes quite well with the plan I already have at the moment from the book I read, Devon Price, of really just concentrating on the things that bring me joy now. And so with this trauma and the need to heal, I'm also just going to be doing things that don't cause me stress. There'll always be a bit of stress in life, of course, but no new things that ramp up that stress level. So I really love public talks. They do make me nervous, but more than anything, they bring me so much joy. I love doing them. So that's okay. But if somebody asks me to do something that's so different to what I normally do, that will ramp up the stress. So that's what I mean. Doing stuff I enjoy and that doesn't bring me stress has got to be my priority now going forward. And some more therapy. I can really see how lots of factors have come together, kind of intersecting to cause these issues. And there's so much crossover between this overworking and trauma. Like I spoke about last week, how a lot of the overworking I do that I hadn't really been consciously aware of was because of trauma. For example, the way I work very, very hard because I'm trans. Because as a trans person, we are seen as less than everybody else. And so I work very hard to be successful in order to be seen and valued and improve my own self-worth. So that shows how trauma and hard work are so kind of like intersected, aren't they? So unpicking some of this is really, really helping to make sense and do things differently. It's complex stuff, right? Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope that it was helpful in some way to somebody else who might be also having some ill health, going through stuff and thinking ahead about how to best take care of yourself so that you don't go into this maladaptive stress response and you don't become unwell. I do hope it's helpful. And if it is, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up or popping a comment below, because I always love chatting to you all and you always end up contributing to my understanding of what's going on for me. Plus, I just like talking to you. I don't get out much these days. Thanks so much, you lovely lot. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon for another video.